Hi friends, Caitlin here from the HomeStyle Honey. Today we are going to be making a homemade apple pie. It is my husband's birthday, and in our family, you get to choose the dessert that you want on your birthday. So instead of doing cake, he likes to choose something different like a pie or a cheesecake or a milkshake bar. So this year it is apple pie. We're going to be making a homemade pie crust from scratch and then making the pie and baking it. I'm using this pie book, 300 Tried and True Recipes for Delicious Homemade Pie from Ken Heidrich. So this looks like this. Love this book. It has lots of great basics. And we're going to do an all butter recipe. Now, some people use shortening, some people use lard. Lard makes a really nice flaky pie crust. Sometimes, depending on the lard, I feel like it can have a different flavor. And shortening makes an amazing pie crust, but I no longer use shortening in my home kitchen and try to stay away from like hydrogenated oil. So we're going to do it all butter. So first thing is we're going to do our flour. So we're going to add 1.5 cups of flour here. Okay, so we're going to add 1.5 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of sugar, and a half teaspoon of salt. And then we're doing a half stick of cold butter cut into pieces. Oh, and actually, we're going to double all this because we're making a double pie crust. So back to the drawing board. So we need a total of 2 3/4 cup of flour. So I'm going to add another cup. I need a 1/4 cup. So it's actually not a true double. Okay, so I've got cold butter and I just cut this into little pieces, into little squares. And then we're just going to cut and crumble it in. There's our first stick, and we're going to do our second. Okay, so now we're just going to start crumbling this butter into the flour. So I like to do homemade pie crust. It is way more economical to make stuff homemade. And I'm just using this little tool, and this just helps cut the butter. But when you buy like a store-bought pie crust, like a Pillsbury or something like that, there's just a lot of extra ingredients that don't need to be in there. Now, if you've never made anything from scratch and this is too intimidating, then buy the frickin' store-bought pie crust. Like, who cares? We all have to start somewhere, and it's better to start imperfect than feel like you have to have every single piece of it homemade. And that's still going to be a step in improvement from buying a completely store-bought pie. Then when you get more comfortable doing a homemade pie, you can level up and start doing homemade pie crust as well. But even homemade pie with a store-bought crust is going to be an improvement. There's just less junk. It's going to taste better. It's going to be so much fresher. And that's kind of the gateway drug into home baked goods, is to have really tasty, fresh food. And the more you do it homemade, the more you notice it. Okay, so we're just going to keep crumbling this in. Okay, so we have all of our butter cut in. You can see it's just nice and crumbly looking. And I've got about a half cup of cold water, and we're just going to pour that in. And this is just going to make our dough clump together nicely. Pie crust is one of those things that's really forgiving to make. So it's a great first step. And what's nice is you can make this ahead of time. So if you're going to be, say, doing Thanksgiving or Christmas and you offer to bring the pies, you can make your pie crust several days in advance, and then the day before make your pie, and the day of actually bake your pie so it's fresh baked, but then you're spacing out the time that all the work has to actually happen. You can also make your pie crust and freeze it. And I will use pie crust for like chicken pot pie, fruit pies. Those are kind of the main ones. If you did other savory pies, this is a great option for it as well. Okay, and that was just about perfect. Now, if your pie crust was just a little too dry, you could add a smidge more water, maybe a teaspoon, a tablespoon even. It's always better to start with less and add more. If it was too wet, just add a little more flour. Okay, so we've got our pie crust. I'm just going to put this in another bowl with a cover on it, and we're going to put this in the refrigerator so it can firm up a little, and we're going to make our pie filling. While our pie dough chills, we're going to get our apples ready. So we're just going to peel our apples. I believe I bought Honeycrisp. There are different recommendations on apples, and people have different opinions. Granny Smith, of course, makes a great apple pie. So Honeycrisp makes a great apple pie. Gala. So we're just going to peel our apples here real quick. Yeah, they're Honeycrisp. I just saw the sticker. So when you are coring and slicing your apples, definitely use an apple slicer if you have it. Mine broke. I haven't replaced it yet. So we're doing this the old fashioned way with a knife. So I used 6 apples. This recipe calls for 6 cups. And so that's going to be roughly 6 apples. I find that a lot of times, no matter how closely I follow the recipe, I end up with extra filling where it doesn't quite fit in the pie, and that's okay. Okay, so this recipe, I'm actually doing a brown sugar apple pie, just because we're using brown sugar is really the main difference there. And that's actually what the recipe calls for. You can definitely use white sugar. And we are going to sweat the apples. I have made a lot of apple pies over the years. Some have turned out beautifully, some have been kind of soupy. And I think the apples can definitely be one factor, but like sweating the apples is another. So either slicing and letting your apples sit an hour or two or even overnight and letting some of those juices run off, or you can do a hot sweat in a skillet. And I really like that because then you make sure that your apples are soft and they're not crunchy, because there's nothing worse than having an apple pie where the crust is beautiful and it looks good, but then some of the apples are a little hard, and this helps get rid of those excess juices. So I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of butter. If I feel like I need to add more, I will. The recipe does not call to do this. This is just something I am doing from my own experience. So I've got my cast iron skillet here. It's hot. We're just going to add that butter and let it melt. Or it's getting hot, I should say. It's not hot yet. And then as that heats up, I'm going to add my apples in. We're also going to get our oven set to 375 so it can get hot and cook. This is starting to melt nicely. Okay, so sweating the apples really is just sauteing them. So as they start to cook, we're going to add in a tablespoon of lemon juice, a half cup of brown sugar, pinch of salt, tablespoon of white sugar, a tablespoon of cornstarch, and a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon. So I'm going to get all of those ready. Our apples are just beginning to saute, so we're just going to let these cook a few more minutes, and then we'll add in all of our ingredients. And while these cook, I'm going to clear myself a little bit of prep space so that I can make my dough. Okay, as these apples are cooking, they don't have to get cooked all the way through. We're just sweating them a little bit. I'm going to grate some lemon zest. My recipe really just calls for lemon juice, but I do find a little bit of lemon zest just adds a little bit more flavor and a little more tart. So if I have a lemon on hand, which I try to always just have some, because if nothing else, we can always dice it and use it in water, then I have what I need on hand for baking, and it just gives me that nice little fresh bit of zest. There we go. So now we are going to add our half cup of lemon, or excuse me, our half cup of brown sugar. Half cup of lemon would be way too much. White sugar, spoon of cornstarch. So cornstarch is your thickening agent. Sometimes you'll have recipes that call for flour. I'm probably going to get some comments telling me that I don't need to sweat my apples if I use a thickener. but my experience is it still just helps to sweat the apples, and I like the results so much better. So there's a little cornstarch, a little pinch of salt, and a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm just gonna let this cook for just a minute more, and I'm gonna start rolling out my pie dough. Okay, so we've got our pie dough here. I'm gonna take about half and just roll this out on a nicely floured surface. There's our pie crust. And then we're just gonna stab our pie crust with a fork a few times, and then our apples are nicely bubbling. I'm gonna just give them another minute for some of those juices to boil off, and then we'll pour our filling in our pie. Okay, apples are out, they're cooling. We're going to roll out our other pie crust, and this is where you can just get creative if you want. So I'm probably just gonna do a lattice. My lattices aren't that pretty. um, I'm not a professional baker. Some people make beautiful lattices. You can also just put your pie crust on top, or you can cut out shapes from a cookie cutter. Okay, and then we have a little bit more dough we can roll out when we need it for more lattice. Those cool just a little more. Okay, so lattice is kind of like weaving, I guess. So you basically just have to go over under. So I will usually lay my first few pieces down in one direction, and then I lay them down the other direction. Okay, so I'm gonna move this a little closer now. So you just take your first one and you kind of have to lift pieces up as you go. So every other one gets lifted up. Let's see. Over, under, over, under, over, under. This one should be. And then I'm just going to keep doing that with the next one. And it should just reverse. I'm just going to lift up every other one. There we go. Okay. And I've got excess dough and we need more dough rolled out. So I'm going to cut some of these excess pieces. Move this back out of the way. So our lattice is done. I've got a little extra dough. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to roll it out into some thin strips I can put around the edge. Just adding a little more water because the flour is kind of making it a little bit drier. You might notice like my pie is not heaping. It's a little bit more flat. That is one thing. Sometimes when you don't sweat your apples and they're not cooked at all. And then you put them in the pie, like they'll sink down a little bit. Here they're already sunk down. And I definitely could have added probably another apple or two. It can just be a little bit of a guessing game, but I didn't really want to go back and add another apple. So we're leaving it and it's still going to be fabulous. And that's the thing too. I think why people sometimes don't always want to cook at home is they get hung up on something being perfect. Like, this is just a pie for me, my husband, and my daughter. I'm not selling this to the public. It doesn't need to be perfect because it's really just for home. And then I'm just gonna like moisten my fingers with some water and pinch. Okay, now that we're kind of getting it stuck together, I can go back and make the edge a little bit more pronounced in its weave. Or not weave. I can make it a little more pronounced for its like ruffle. And again, like, I'm not worried about perfection. This is just for home. This is just for fun and just to be enjoyable. And it's just like a great time-honored skill and tradition to have like a good classic homemade pie, especially a good homemade apple pie. What's more all-American than that? Here's our pie with our little lattice pie crust, and then I'm going to do an egg wash. Okay, 1 egg battered and mixed, and we're just going to brush this all over. And the reason you do an egg wash, if you're not aware, is it really just gives it a beautiful golden crust. There we are. And we're going to sprinkle with a little bit of sugar. And a little bit of white sugar. And this is going in the oven. All right, we'll see how it turns out.